I hated myself, totally hated myself for many, many years. I was angry with God, because why in the hell would you make me this way?
I do try not to pay attention to children. That's purely because I can be very easily distracted by them.
Rather than making it easier for him to come in to a therapist, we've made it practically impossible. And somehow society believes that this is making them safer. There are still really only 2 teams in the entire world working on this at all. My group in Canada and the Dunkelfeld project in Germany.
You have to take into account that these people are among us.
They're innocent children. They shouldn't have to be condemned because they have placed a criminal across our street.
If you want to protect children, why is there no help for these people who are sexually attracted to children? Why is there nowhere that these people can go? Why do you wait until a crime has been committed and then you go out and prosecute somebody, but until then, you do nothing?
It's just beautiful. It's the house that we'd always wanted. They can just play outside by themselves for hours. Why would we ever want to move from here? My 4-year-old knows something's going on. He doesn't know exactly what's going on, but it totally affects him. He thinks there's a bad guy there and says, well, what does he do to kids? But you should never even have to have that conversation with a 4-year-old. Like, they should just be able to be free. My daughter should be able to run around in her underwear through the sprinkler in my front yard. They're innocent children. They shouldn't have to be condemned because they have placed a criminal across our street.
People in the city are being warned about James William Conway. The 40-year-old has a long criminal record, including sex offenses against girls. Corrections believes Conway is a high risk to reoffend.
My husband, he's just been having like a real hard time with this. How do you protect your wife and kids legally? He doesn't know. He leaves during the day to go to work. He's not here. I mean, it takes him probably an hour to get home if anything were to happen. He watches my kids play every day. One day, he'll decide that it's enough of being in that house, and then whose kid is gonna be hurt? Whether corrections or community living believe this is the right spot for him, it's not. There is no place for him here, and the community will not stop.
I volunteered for every job that they offered me that was dangerous. Mexico, Colombia, Central America, South America, Peru. I was a demolitions expert. I was a weapons expert. Most people would see me as guy, a guy, not a, somebody who's actually attracted to children. through my teenage years, I would say I was extremely depressed, very angry. My attraction wasn't aging with me. It was staying in that same area of, say, 7 to say 12, and usually at the lower end. They may think of me as a monster, a freak, whatever, but the way that they feel about me, I've felt worse for myself. Everybody always tries to talk about a cure, and I got news for you. If there was ever a cure for something like this, I'd be in line. This attraction makes your life a living hell, makes you an outcast.
I do try not to pay attention to children. That's purely because I can be very easily distracted by them. There are times where somebody will stand out and catch my attention, and I can't help but look. And it's one of those situations where you need to slap yourself to not make it look completely obvious that you're transfixed by the beauty of a child. There is an attraction to children there that's just far deeper than sexual. And that's what people don't understand. I think people conflate pedophilia with this kind of sadistic urge to hurt children and to take advantage of those that are most vulnerable. When I was in my mid-20s, this was the stage where I was becoming increasingly aware of this pedophilic tendency within. And I was struggling. I have to say I was struggling, with the idea that there was the potential there within me to sexually interact with a child. There was nobody to speak to as such. The woman that I was with at the time, she had plenty of her own issues. But she was kind enough to want to know what my issues were. It was like flicking a switch. From sitting next to me on the couch, she stood up, pretty much like a soldier, to attention, and crossed the room, sat down, lit a cigarette, and just sat there looking at me. Within the week, the news was out. For a whole town where you've been living for the majority of your life, where you've been based, to then find out that you have a pedophilic tendency, it's the end. But I thought, well, if I can get help, maybe there's a reason, maybe there's a way of changing this. Maybe I can be different. I said to the psychiatrist, look, I can't imagine myself doing anything, but I can't get these thoughts out of my head. He looked at me like I was an alien, like I had two heads. And I thought, why am I doing this? Why have I even bothered to tell anybody? Nobody wants to know, and everybody's hating me for this. I didn't want to be looked at again, like this guy had been looking at me. It was like, horror. This man is sexually attracted to little girls.
The day before somebody gives in to his sexual interest in children, he was a person who was struggling with his sexual interest in children. And that's the day we failed him. Rather than making it easier for him to come in to a therapist, we've made it practically impossible. So rather than having a pedophile out in society receiving support or medication, we have a pedophile out in society receiving absolutely no supervision whatsoever. And somehow society believes that this is making them safer. What I was expecting to see in the early days was just a pattern of strengths and weaknesses that might be different among the pedophiles than the non-pedophiles. What we did find, however, was their IQs were a little bit lower, their scores on memory tests were slightly lower. One of the interesting things that we found was a difference in height. Pedophiles seem to be slightly shorter, about 2.5 centimeters shorter than a non-pedophile. Now, just for perspective, the amount by which a pedophile is too short is double the amount that would happen if a woman smoked when she was pregnant. Then other findings started emerging. In a regular everyday population, somewhere between 8 and 10% of people are non-right-handed. But it was over 30% of the pedophiles. That's extremely rare. The only other populations which have non-right-handedness differences that high are people with schizophrenia and people with autism. Each of these clues altogether were pointing us over and over again to something in the brain. The hard part was when we started getting the results, and they were not the results we thought. In those days, everything we knew was on the surface of the brain. But they found these large differences in the connective tissue. The layer of tissue under the outside of the brain is composed of what we call white matter. It's mostly fibrous tissue that connects the various parts of the brain together so it functions as a cohesive whole. And there were huge differences. When we show a regular heterosexual man pictures of a nude female, certain parts of the brain light up. The visual areas of the brain light up, the face recognition part of the brain, the movement parts of the brain, the areas we would expect. When we show a pedophile a picture of a child, the very same areas of the brain light up. All of the areas that light up, both in pedophiles and in adults, are all connected through the same set of white matter tissue that my team detected being different between pedophiles and non-pedophiles. It's as if there's a literal cross-wiring in the brain. This was really the first, pretty undeniable proof that pedophilia is in the brain and not going to change. Pedophilia is something that a person does not ask for. It's biological. It's in their brain, they're born with it, and we can't change it. When you get right down to it, there are still really only 2 teams in the entire world working on this at all. My group in Canada and the Dunkelfeld project in Germany. The biggest difference between Germany and Canada, and much of the rest of the world for that matter, is that Germany still protects doctor-patient confidentiality in a way that most other countries do not. In Germany, because they don't have mandatory reporting, they can get people with no history of ever having offended against children and invite those people to participate in research studies. If a valvometric test says that somebody's a pedophile and they're not, you've ruined somebody's life. The clinician can say, I don't think the test is correct, but once that's in the hand of a lawyer or a courtroom system, you have ended the person's life as they know it. So we have specifically biased the test in favor of not diagnosing pedophilia. There are 2 ways a test can be wrong. A test can say somebody is a pedophile when they're not, or a test can say somebody is not a pedophile when they actually are. It's easier and more effective to think of this as 2 numbers. What's the probability of missing something?
If I tell you I'm a drug addict, maybe you will come to me as you're my neighbor and would like to drink a bottle of wine, and I would say, no, I don't drink wine because I'm an alcoholic. I would not lose your respect. I wouldn't. But if I tell you I can't take care for your son because I'm pedophilically inclined, I'm completely right in my answer, and in my behavior, but at this moment, I'm stigmatized. Pedophilia is part of human sexuality. And what we have to tell the public is that we should not condemn the preference, we should condemn the false behavior. It's very important to differentiate, because then we can enhance the chance to reach this group.
In the beginning, I was very confused. Then I thought, they aren't children. They're already at an age where they are starting to become interested in their sexuality. She was smart, beautiful. Her hips weren't pronounced yet, her breasts were small. She was 13. She had the body of a girl. For so long I thought about how I could get away with this.
When a scientist says pedophilia, we mean specifically sexual interest for children who are pre-pubertal. We use a different word to describe the attraction to early pubescent children. We call that hebephilia. If a regular, everyday heterosexual man finds somebody attractive in a bar, the smallest little move can be interpreted as flirtatious. A touch of a drink, a touch of the lips. The thing that makes a pedophile willing to give in to their sexual interests is to fool themselves into seeing a situation other than how it is. When they meet a child that they happen to find attractive, and children are often naturally friendly or naturally cuddly, to a pedophile, that can seem flirtatious. They convince themselves into thinking that this kid knows what it is that they're doing, they know the nature of the interaction, and they start making more and more sexual overtures towards the child. It's not difficult for a pedophile to turn a stranger into a mentorship relationship, into a closer relationship, into one that the pedophile will see as romantic and potentially sexual, even though to the child, it's just play.
One day, I was giving her a private lesson. And I started stroking her arms, her upper body. I complimented her and kissed her. To me, it felt right. But I could tell she wasn't enjoying it. She must have reported it soon after, because there was this restlessness at school. Everyone wanted to know what happened. At home, I told my wife that the girl had misunderstood the situation. And at first she believed me. But as the criminal proceedings began, I realized that I couldn't get out of this. They were going to convict me, so I told her everything. She was furious, and who could blame her? She felt betrayed, so she left.
My wife and I, we've done foster care, actually, and we've had some great experiences with it. You know, we were able to make some children who may have started out having a really rough life have a lot of fun. A young boy who was in our care at the time, he was 8 years old. And I was trying to deal with, my own feelings. Made it really tough. And unfortunately, I reached for the internet. Most of the pictures that I searched out were of boys swimming or in their underwear. I wanted to see them happy. I saw some pictures online that were, of children being hurt, but they're not the pictures that I was interested in. The police came to my house. I admitted to what I had done. I think if I could do it all over again, at least that part would be much different. They searched my computer, they found what I had. They took a lot of rolls of film that had absolutely nothing to do with what happened. We can never get them back. I had a total of 25 pictures that were considered illegal and pornographic. And I was charged for every one of them.
Some stuff I don't ever want to see again. I don't want to remember what I've seen. I was masturbating 2 or 3 times a day. It got to the stage where I was doing it in public toilets, in public cubicles. And it sounds incredibly foolish, and it is, but when you're that out of control and you have no help, you have no discourse for sorting it. I mean, my experiences of trying to talk to people about this were I was never going to go back to a therapist. I'd already changed my name, thinking that I'd left this part of myself behind me. People are allowed to hate this demographic, this population, this minority in our species. You can say what you want to them, you can think what you like about them, and in an ideal world, you can do what you want to them.
The first month or so, I was scared to death. Being that I was labeled as a sex offender, there was a huge target on me. I didn't realize that until I got there and saw how beat down, not only physically, but emotionally, some of these guys were. Broken bones, facial disfigurations, they were cut, they were, lucky to still be alive. I had my first black belt by the time I was 10. I hold belts in 3 different disciplines. So the last thing you want to do is take on a large group of people. If you can go to where it's one-on-one, you're the most safe. I choked him out. I cut off his air supply, so eventually he was going to go out and I could let go.
First hand. First hand.
Pedophilia is the actual sexual interest, regardless of whether a person buries it and never tells a soul and never does anything about it their entire life, or if they actually act on it. There are pedophiles who never molest children, and there are child molesters who are not actually pedophilic. The most heinous cases, the ones associated with violence, the ones associated with kidnapping, murder, and mutilation of the body, those are people who have two diagnoses. One of them is the pedophilia itself, the actual sexual interest in children. The other is what we usually call psychopathy. These are people who are generally unable to see other people as people. They're merely toys to play with to do whatever it is that they want with. They're thankfully rare.
He would lure me and invite me to go out in a boat at the local yacht club because I was roaming around the streets then.
A Nova Scotia man whose convictions for sexually assaulting boys in the 70s and 80s were overturned in court is tonight behind bars in Nepal for allegedly sexually abusing a minor there. This news, disturbing as it is, comes as no surprise to one of those who says he suffered abuse at the hands of Ernest Fenwick McIntosh. Amanda Debison has the story.
Like the father figure, he'd put you in bed, he'd tuck you in, and I would remember trying to fall asleep and not trying to fall asleep, but all of a sudden, before you knew it, your underwear are down, and he's orally raping me. I felt so ashamed and embarrassed to myself, but not only that, I remember when he finished, when he did that to me, he patted me on the head and said, "Good boy," and I felt like a dog. But then when you talk to your buddies, you know, play hockey or school, then they said, "Oh, we saw you with Fruity Finn. You're a fruit too," and that was the term back there. Pedophilia wasn't a term for me. People said McIntosh was homosexual, but he wasn't. He was a 31-year-old predator that was abusing children. You're never over. It's like a tattoo. It will never go away. It wasn't consensual, and it was a horrible thing that he did, and it shaped me. It shaped me the way I acted and acted out. Is pedophilia a disease? I can't answer that. But if it is, I hope there's help for them.
The Dunkelfeld project came about the time I was looking for it. I felt like I couldn't trust my own feelings or the way I assessed certain situations. Early on in the phone interview, they diagnosed me as a pedophile. I thought, okay, I'm not weird enough that the people like me don't exist at all. Before therapy began, I was very, very nervous. What kind of men are attracted to children? Most of us in the group had committed an assault, some only once, some more often. There was one of us who was much older. He had abused his granddaughter for many years. There were several sessions focused on empathy. And we were asked to play our victims in a reenactment of our assaults. I couldn't do anything but suffer through it. It was terrifying. I didn't have the option of saying, "Stop, you dirty bastard," or something to that effect. Because at that moment, the man sitting behind me was my teacher. A teacher that I really liked. For the first time, I realized that a girl this young couldn't really be expected to fight this experience. I had understood it in my head, but I had never felt it. It was the worst day of therapy. But I realized just how wrong it was to advance on such a young girl. As an adult, under no circumstances could I ever let this happen again.
The most important part, really, for a pedophile is the same as anybody else, a sense of being connected to other people, others who share a similar experience. The nature of pedophilia and the stigma about it being what it is, sometimes they can only be anonymous interactions, for example, over the internet.
If you want to protect children, why is there no help for these people who are sexually attracted to children? Why is there nowhere that these people can go? Why do you wait until a crime has been committed and then you go out and prosecute somebody? But until then, you do nothing. Mike, who founded Before You Act, wasn't ashamed of his sexuality. And I try not to be. Mike had a fairly long-term relationship with a boy. He was arrested for it and did some prison time. When he got out of prison, he said he was tired of hiding this important part of who he was. In this video he made shortly before he died of emphysema, he said that to come out to people was the most important thing he ever did in his life. It was his way of being complete.
Coming out. That's the most important thing that I could ever do. It tells me that I'm alive. It tells me that I have a place in this world. What coming out means, it means that I'm not afraid. It means that I'm not afraid.
There has actually been a long history among activists fighting for, if I can call it that, pedophile rights. These are groups that not so much advocate for sexual interactions with children, but believe that the children themselves should be legally allowed to give consent.
Virtuous Pedophiles is a different kind of online community for a different kind of pedophile. Child sexual abuse is wrong. Dead wrong. When I read about it, my stomach turns. Pedophiles know that they are perhaps the most viscerally hated group on earth. Most take great pains to make sure their attraction remains a secret.
I'm not crazy about the name, but this is now a large departure from previous groups which say that they're fighting for children's rights to be sexual, but really the virtuous pedophiles are, I think, much more realistic about what it is that society is able and willing and should tolerate. These are people who realized over the course of life that they are sexually attracted to children and that they can't act on it. Essentially, they swear themselves to a life of celibacy, which is, of course, no easy thing for anybody.
Virtuous pedophiles effectively saved me. You know, I've been very close, particularly over the last 3 years, to suicide. I thought about hanging, and I'd looked into all the details that I'd need to consider, you know, for my weight and my height, the rope needed to be a certain length. You know, if somebody's going through a tough time, you know, or somebody's in a situation with a child, we can encourage people to live a non-offending life.
The more open a person can be, I think, at least for me, the more happy I am. If I can be totally open, I'm pretty happy with myself then. And I mean, I'm not saying that happy people don't do stupid things, but I think that happy people tend to not want to hurt others.
When we leave this world, we all go to the same place. The only heaven and hell that we have is here on earth. God tests everybody, and that's my test. What do I do with this body, with these feelings, with these thoughts? And so far I've made many mistakes, but I've not made, to use the Catholic term, the cardinal error of interacting with a child.
First hand. First hand.
Knowing that pedophilia is biological and, as best as we can determine, unchangeable, we can stop worrying about making the problem worse. We're talking about people who cannot act out their sexual interests, without risking harm to a genuine child. So, of course, we start thinking about what the other alternatives might be. Text-based porn is an obvious one. Well, what about a doll? What about a life-size doll of a child? All of a sudden, we're in a very uncomfortable position, but a very important position, in that we do need seriously to rethink, are we making the problem worse instead of better, or are we just making laws that are expensive to enforce to no foreseeable good?
We have reached around 5,000, but if you estimate 1% prevalence for the male population in Germany, there must be 250,000 inclined men with this erotic preference for prepubescent children.
A project like the Prevention Project Dunkelfeld and prevention projects in general are usually extremely cost-effective. Once somebody is apprehended, sent to jail, and then often civilly committed, is somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 per person per year. If a program like the Prevention Project Dunkelfeld prevents even just a small handful of cases, it would very, very easily pay for itself.
Schon früh habe ich gemerkt, dass ich anders ticke. War schon klar,
wie man über solche wie mich denkt.
Krank, pervers, Abschaum.
Dachte ich ja auch.
Dabei habe ich meine Fantasien noch nie ausgelebt. Durch die Therapie habe ich gelernt, niemand ist schuld an seiner sexuellen Neigung.
Aber jeder verantwortlich für sein Verhalten. Ich will kein Täter werden.
Präventive Therapie verhindert sexuellen Kindesmissbrauch.
Sometimes people say, well, why would you want to provide support for somebody who's committed some pretty heinous offenses, sexually, often against very vulnerable people, our children? And that's a good question. The reason that a circle of support and accountability is there is to make sure that that individual buys into the bottom line of a circle of support and accountability, which is that there be no more victims.
This circle is an embodiment of the community. So we've got a parole officer, a police officer, a realtor, and the list goes on. It's meant to be an illustration of the community being here for you, supporting you, as well as holding you accountable.
We're all here because we want you to succeed. We don't want to see a refund. We don't want you to go back to prison.
We fought like crazy for him. I didn't think that they would just automatically take him because he was adopted at the time. Our last visit with him was kind of a goodbye visit. Extremely tough for me. Extremely tough for Lori, for my wife. But his social worker actually took me aside and said to me, she sat me down and said, you know, Bobby, you know, this situation is horrible. But I do know that you did not touch him in any sexual way. And I broke down right there because that's all I had been telling people all along. And, you know, if they would have understood that, you know, to begin with, and just said, okay, you know what? You broke the law. Okay, if you have to go to jail or if you have to go to prison, so be it. Why take him out of a home where he was extremely happy?
To assume that all pedophiles are going to act on their impulses would suggest that all male adults are rapists or potential rapists. Society, in their ignorance, they say, well, if you have a pedophilic tendency, you're going to do something. Inevitably, at some time in your life, you are going to sexually interact with a child. I've had this conversation with people. I've said to them, look, I'm attracted to little girls. And it's, you know, when are you going to do something about it then? You know, inevitably you're going to act on this. And I'm like, no. No.
Hating and pushing away and driving out is the easiest thing in the world to do. The hardest thing in the world to do is to look at someone who is afflicted with pedophilia and find there some room for compassion. Not everybody can. But if you look deeply, if you look really hard, you'll find the human being in there.